as a crab boat crew member for 2.5 years. The most important thing is not to help the captain catch crabs. It's the rest of the captain's funeral gift. The key is this knife. Keep the crab pot from bundling with you during the day. Fencing with the captain at night. No wonder I'm good. The picture begins on the stow. White bared his teeth and called Mandy, making fun of the last 2 days with Mandy. Said he'd be back before Mandy gave birth. They were also near the float when the call ended. This crab pot fishing is a new guy. Wait for the old white honk this new face mang. He had to wait for the old white to scold him before he started fishing. You call this kid stupid or stupid? Fortunately, the anchor hook was on target. Old white said there were 3 days left before the first delivery, but only 30% have been caught. If we don't catch another king crab in the next few days, we'll just have to go home. On deck, the crew salvaged. No accidents, no cages, or nothing. Old white had to voice telegram to vent their dissatisfaction. The next salvage is the new guy. The first throw of the hook is not going to be an accident. The second time, there's no chance of an accident. This fucking thing blew up right then and there, but the crab pot was fished out the third time. And then the third cage and the first hook is still empty. Old white said his dead grandmother. It's easy to get at this close range. This sand sculpture can't be retrieved 3 times. I didn't expect it. He even made himself back in the boat. Then a knot comes up before the crab pot is even on board. See Gale on the side and come up and show them how to handle it. But the rookie throwing the anchor hook was more defiant. He feels like he can handle it without having to be taught by Gal. But Gal doesn't want to talk too much nonsense to a fool. Just let him shut up and watch himself. Because Gal doesn't speak very kindly. The crew can't afford to start poking around. Gale's got a temper and he's got a theory. But the crew doesn't care. To Gal, you're getting old. What? After all, Gal's old and doesn't think that fast. I had to take the fall in this quarrel. The crewman made an international gesture when Gale left. The white guy up there doesn't want to be that involved because he knows what's causing this. Still no crabs these days. 27 miles south on the Tro. Bill asked Fat if he had anything to remember coordinates, just in case there's a problem with the computer. Fat said maybe there should be. Then came a paper plate and a pen. Good guy doesn't even have a notebook on the boat. Luckily, Bill didn't care. It even smells like reindeer sausage. Bill said the trip to Norway was a good opportunity. I got myself some Norwegian crabbing experience and pay off the Summer Bay repair bill. But that's only if we can catch the crabs. Bill came to the strait after many investigations. Research shows it was 200 years ago. A Russian merchant ship once again fell silent. The king crabs on board have been here for another 200 years. They pose a serious ecological threat. Norwegian ports have deregulated this place in recent years. As long as we can find crabs in this place, he'll be making money on the Summer Bay in half a month. Bill said that because of the fast water in this place, the boat was washed about. In the same way, a crab pot will run loose. So they put 20 crab pots together. This greatly reduces the time to find the float. Then the crew began throwing crab pots. Bill notes the coordinates as the crew throws. I've been busy anyway. Because of the small crab pot, the cast was finished in less than 2 hours. At the same time, Bill showed the coordinates he had memorized. 3,600 miles southeast of the Wizard. Keith is in a meeting with the crew right now. Talk to the crew about the plan. And then there's the old cliche of security. Then I went back to the captain's cabin to talk to Ross. Keith said they were at the port for 2 weeks. The other ships are far behind schedule. So Keith told Ross to roll on deck and work. The wind and waves on deck were quite strong at this time. Keith bought 2 million king crab allotments at the beginning of the season. The rest is well known. No Law had to buy another 1 million snow crab quota. Plus, it cost $200,000 to refurbish the Witcher's engines. So Keith is now $1.5 million in debt. Plus, Tyler left for the baby. He took his brother with him when he left, so he hired 3 new recruits. Keith is off to a hell of a start. The deck crew is also throwing crab pots. As time goes by, one by one, the crab pots were thrown into the sea. Soon it went from late at night to 5 in the morning. The sea also became rough at this time. But the new crew has a lot of stamina, and it far exceeded Keith's expectations. As the cage mission reaches its final stage, the crew was exhausted too. There will be an accident if there isn't one. Sure enough, the new crew was caught in the fishing line in a daze. The old crew rushed up to catch him. The captain of the deck immediately cut the line, although the rescue was done in an instant. But the new crew was still scared out of their wits. I almost got dragged down by the crab pot. I'd be scared to death. Then Keith hurried down to check on the crew. A look at the new crew showed no apparent injuries. It was just a case of being scared out of my mind. Keith was a little scared after all this. We had to let the crew rest. 3,600 miles northwest of the Tro. They're also getting a lot of rain. Heavy rain in the channel. It's almost making it impossible to move the boat properly. But the crab pot has been in it for 10 hours. The crabs are probably gone if we don't catch them. Then Bill wiped the mist off the windows. One more thing for the fat guy who walked in. Let them remember to keep themselves safe. Then Fat and Langdon put on their raincoats. To the deck to begin the salvage operation. There were 4 people on board. Bill, Fat, Langdon, and the photographer. If something goes wrong, The four can't handle it. They had to pray for the blessing of the crab god. Then the crab pot boarded the boat, and there were really 3 crabs inside. It also proved that Bill's plan was right. Then the crew began to salvage the second cage. There are 6 crabs in this cage. This is a good harvest for Xiaolong. If the rest of the cages had this harvest, Bill can fill White's quota in 3 days tops. The subsequent third harvest was no worse. Bill, who kept a straight face all day, barely managed to smile. So Bill was pretty pleased with the harvest. 35 miles north on the Stowe, Old White got a phone call from Bill. White, tell me the truth about what's going on here, and asked how things were going with Bill. Bill said he ran his own tests. It turns out that crabs mostly move around 290 meters. Then 2 people, and then a spotless analysis. White also found out about Bill's situation. After hanging up, Bill decided to go to the next place, the old crab pot. But as we walked, we realized something was wrong. The coordinates say it's right here, but that's just not finding the crab pot. Then he turned around a lot and found the crab pot on the left. Bill died speechless too. But when it was time to salvage, there was another accident. The crew noticed that no matter how they pulled the crab pot, it wouldn't budge, and the line is still sinking. Bill knew right away that something was wrong. There's no way the crab pot line went down for no reason, unless it got tangled up in a propeller. Then Bill ordered it cut up. Bill said it was close to the beach, so he's going to drive it back. But no sooner had the OERS accelerated than they roared. Bill heard the sound. I knew the boat wouldn't move now. Bill isn't over his head right now. Sit there and start meditating on solutions. And I couldn't think of a way for a long time. Had to call Fat to call the Coast Guard rescue, with little Fat to report the situation again, because the storm is so bad right now. So the Coast Guard won't be here until tomorrow morning. To keep the ship from drifting with the wind, Bill told the crew to lower the anchor. Then comes the long wait, 3,600 miles southeast of the Wizard. The weather is not good on their side either. Then Keith called Rose up. Start telling Ross about Bala Bala. It turns out the ultimate goal is to get Ross on deck. That's a big wave for Ross in his 50s. I'm not afraid of Ross having a G-bang. Then Rose went to put on his gear. Keith said he didn't want his brother to go, but I can't help it. These 3 new crewmen are a real treat. Ross put on his gear and went on deck. When Rose came up, the crew began to salvage. But what's with Ross's pointy head? Is it because passion is burning? The crew cheered as the crab pot reached the deck. As you can see, this cage is doing really well. After sorting, there were 41 adult crabs. The subsequent second harvest was also quite good. After sorting, it was as high as 48. But Keith wasn't thrilled, because Keith has it all under control. With salvage, the sea also raised waves. But these difficulties alone did not deter the crew. It's not going to stop Keith from paying off his debts. 3,400 miles northwest of Stowe. White's trying to reconcile them now, but both were extremely perfunctory. But the crew member was still young. In a moment, he was trying to lift the crab pot with a crane, but old Biden just pushed himself away. So you don't understand anything as soon as you try to explain. After listening to his explanation, Old White said, if I had swapped Gal for me, I would say the same thing myself. Because when the crane doesn't have a place to hold the crab pot, blind unhook crab pot line package broken. And Gal right there. And then he said that even though he was a little harsh, before Gar could finish, the crew greeted him. Old White hurried to stop the impending quarrel. And then he first praised the crew for their thoughts and said we couldn't take the risk. That's why Gal shouted to stop you. The crew thought it made sense and let it go. After resolving the conflict, Old White went back to the captain's room to prepare the cage. Since the last time I heard about Bill's harvest, he starts looking for 280 to 290, even though they were far apart. But White believes there could be similarities. After reaching a channel, the crew also began to drop crab pots. Old White wrote down the coordinates when the crab pot was dropped. That new crewman on deck has a lot of guts. An accident happened when the crab went under the cage. The crew was dragged to the ground by the line. Old White was also shocked by the situation. Luckily, Gal cut the line in the first place. At the end of the accident, the sailor was lost. Guess he didn't expect to see each other last night. I became a lifesaver this morning. Gal told the new crew, tell them all to bring a knife. No knife on deck is no life. Then Old White asked how the crew was feeling. The crewman said it was all right, and a big thank you to Gale for doing this. After the conversation, Old White said Malice's voice was a little shaky, but his job is fraught with danger. This time it comes down to Gal. The picture goes to Bill at anchor, looking so close to the beach. Can't wait for the Coast Guard. So he decided to bring out the bottom of the box. That is to go with the force of the current and the wind. Then use the rudder to control the direction. I ran that way for half an hour. It was only 60 meters from the beach, and then I worked him to 65 meters. When Bill picked his foot in embarrassment, finally came the radio from the Coast Guard. Little Fat quickly began to negotiate on the side. The Coast Guard arrived without incident. throw over a rope. They set out happily for the port, 3,400 miles southeast of the Wizard. Their harvest lasted all day and night. There are no fewer than 30 crabs in each cage. But again, the weather hasn't been good either. Give the crew a big mouth every now and then. The alarm went off before Keith could speak. Ross heard the alarm and hurried to the machine room. Keith also finds the steering mechanism broken. Then Ross and the mechanic turn around and check. Tess found no obvious faults. I look up and I see that the screws on the steering column are loose. Give it a little tightness. Ross came up for Keith to test. There's nothing wrong with the test. Then they explained it to Keith. I went back to work on deck. Then the View goes to the Norwegian port. Bill called in a diver to fix it. This thing is easy to fix in 2 cool clicks. Bill's problem solved. The View goes to the Witcher. Brother Ross came to Keith to strike. And their harvest continues. The View goes back to the stow. Have dropped a crab pot for the past 6 hours. Old White decided to first salvage test water. The salvage crew is still Maris. He's been trained by Gal, and now he's Fexib. Then the crab pot crew went straight to cheering. This time there were 7 or 8 crabs inside. This is all for the Old White excited. Finally, 6 were sorted out. Old White says 6 crabs in 6 hours are satisfied. The second pot of crabs that followed also had crabs. The number is still 6. Old White is quite satisfied with this. And that's the end of this video. Do you want to know what happened next? Here's how much the captains earned. There are often intrigues among crabber captains, but most captains do it fair and square. Josh from the Mary today. I set my sights on happy boy Nathan. Start with some sweet talk. Then he sends 6 to steal the house. The sky fell when happy boy saw the float. I will never believe a man's sweet words again. The storyline follows on from the last episode. Old White steered the stow back to port to unload. And far away in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, the largest crab processing plant is running out of king crabs. Announced the early closure of the acquisition. The exact time hasn't been mentioned yet. For all the captains out there in the Bering Sea. On hearing the news, everyone cast a sad face. The picture came to the Mary. They're putting the crab pot in there, and the 2 guys up there talking. Casey said this place was kind of their secret base. But this secret base is a little stretched right now. Then the crab pot boarded the boat, really no chicken hair. But Josh thinks the first crab pot didn't have any crabs. Doesn't mean there aren't any crabs in the crab pot back there. Then the second cage came up empty again. Then the third cage and the fourth cage were all the same. The 2 guys up there got a big one too. There could have been a dozen crabs yesterday. 7 or 8 cages in a row today, all Air Force. At this time, the salvage work below is also coming to an end. This cage also brought them their only catch. Looking at such a dismal harvest, Josh thought it was time to talk to a seasoned captain. 54 miles northwest of the Thief. They've had a good harvest these past 2 days. Nathan is sitting above an undersea rift. It is also the best fishing ground for golden king crabs. The crew were quite satisfied with the harvest of the last few days. Then, without incident, a telegram arrived from the Mary. Nathan thought something had happened to those idiots again. Josh then explained that they were fine. Just wanted to get some news on the crab, and said he was close to Nathan. Nathan heard what they were saying too. I was playing dopey right then and there. 3 words out of my mouth. I don't understand. The 2 people opposite have no choice but to continue to ask. After all, there's money to be made. Later, Nathan made a joke about the last time we worked together. That was a year ago. Nathan just established a partnership with them. They caught the crab. Nathan didn't. Just asked them about it. And the 2 of them didn't say a word. If Nathan hadn't heard the crew's cries of harvest, I think Nathan's still on the hook for these 2. But now they're in a much easier position. Or did Nathan start playing dumb too? But that doesn't stop them from being sincere. And all kinds of people who can't pay their wages. Finally, the good-hearted Nathan said the location, and give the depth information along with it. Nathan said after the call, even after last year, I don't like these guys very much, but Nathan thinks captains work together. Only a good atmosphere can make the industry grow. 406 miles southeast of the Legend. The crew is throwing crab pots. Anderson up there calls Sean again. So, these guys talk on the phone. Anderson tells me how profitable black cod is. Sean talks about how easy it is to catch jumbo crabs. It's not really useful to skip this. Anderson mentions it after hanging up. I signed a contract with Sean while I was at sea. He was mortgaging his share of the Legend to Sean. Sean gave himself a quota of 500,000 pounds of black cod. £500,000 worth about $2.7 million. All Anderson has to do is fill his quota. Otherwise, his shares will disappear. It's the same as putting all your money on the line. Anderson made a big play this time. Then he began to introduce the cage plan. It's between 2 extinct volcanoes in the ocean. Subsequent time flow. Soon came to the cage work finished. Anderson told Cheyenne to keep vigil and go back to rest. With Cheyenne's broken thoughts, time began to fly by. Fast forward to late night. The alarm on the ship suddenly went off. Cheyenne gets a little dumbstruck when she looks at people. Why is the fucking pipe leaking? He ran and woke Anderson up. Anderson looked vaguely at the surveillance camera. I'm not confused right away. Go to the engine room and ask Mike to take the helm. Get to the engine room and organize the crew immediately. Then grab the wrench and rush in to fix the pipe. At this point, the water near the pipe was up to the ankles. Anderson is now attempting to remove the adapter. The crew was nervous to help Anderson. Then the accident happened again. The ship was suddenly dark. Mason, the mechanic, didn't mind the power outage. Start the pump first, in a hurry to turn on the ship's backup power. When power was restored, Cheyenne started making new adapters. Anderson also removed the broken adapter. The result is a surge in water leakage. Thank God Cheyenne is moving fast. Then he rushed the new connector to Anderson, and Anderson was able to hook this thing up. When the crisis was over, Anderson yelled at the squid 5 times. I was relieved to get back to the cab. The crew below are also gossiping about the crisis. The cooperation of the crew is still very good, although the crisis has been resolved. But Anderson wasn't reassured. After all, the transfer interface is just a broken steel pipe. The view goes to Stowe. They just finished unloading the crabs. I'm on my way to the harbor to pick up some crab pots. Then Old By talked about his plan. He says there's 15.8 tons left on the quota. It's going to take another 2 or 3 weeks. When you're done with the crabs, hurry back to Dutch Harbor. Go to this year's snow crab season. After all, I still have a lot of unused quotas. After we pick up the crab pot in the harbor, White's going to find someone to get some intel on. Soon the boats came to the harbor. But then the accident happened. There were several ships in the harbor. Make sure you block the road to the shore. Old White first took the radio and shouted several times, but no one cared about him. See no effect Old White to a far place to shore. Tell the crew to warn them. White said if these 3 ships go to the show, definitely the captain's pet peeves, because this kind of cargo port wasn't built for yachts. No one said anything even though you stopped. But I'm so mad at you for talking to you. It would be rude of you to stay still. The crew were now at the boat. The Snowball tried to rouse the captain. The captain comes out and the women talk to each other. He said he would be leaving soon. Then came the second boat. The female crew went down to the other's boat. Hit the big glass to keep that guy up. When the man came out, the crewwoman honked. The captain said to move immediately. The female crew is thrilled to see how well it's going. She thought all the captains, they're all cranky like Old White. Go to the 3rd ship and call the captain. And this guy came out as beep, beep, beep. It's almost fucking time for the telegraph. 3 young guys who don't know how to handle it. The conversation was also heard by the Old White on the radio. Listen to this bitch spit shit out of her mouth. Old White pick up the walkie-talkie as an output for the women in the crew, but the bitch wouldn't let it go. I have no choice but to let them back, and said not to talk too much to fools. Fools can only be dealt with in extreme ways. When the crew gets back, White set the horn to go off every 5 seconds. It rings for 5 seconds. Gal was watching from the boat. 2 minutes later, that boat couldn't stand to go. After landing, Gar operates the crane to lift the crab pot. Old White is thinking about intelligence. After thinking about the Old White decision, ask a crab captain here. 3,800 miles southeast aboard the Legend. The crew is ready to start fishing for crab pots. Anderson said he was worried about the waves today because he's afraid the pipes below won't withstand the impact. If it's in a bad spot, we're in big trouble. So he had to scramble to get the last 20 tons. Go to the harbor and get this thing fixed. Then the crew began to salvage. Turn with the take-up machine. The crab pot is also pulled out of the water. You don't even have to guess that this cage is a good harvest. After sorting, 46 large black fish were found. The crew was having fun when a wave hit. Anderson sent Mason to check the pipes after the big wave. There was nothing wrong after the examination. Report to Anderson and get back to work. Mason just got back with a cage of cod on board. Just after sorting, another wave came in. Mason was ordered to check the pipes again. The plumbing was clean again after the inspection. Back in the deck crab pot and another bumper harvest. After sorting, another spray beat. Mason went down again to check the pipes. Again, there was nothing wrong with it. It was a cycle for one night anyway. The view then moves to Thief. The crew are fishing for crab pots. Nathan says this canyon has had good harvests in the past. He's going to make 2 or 3 more rounds. I can take care of the rest of the quota. Drop to a depth of about 390 meters. Notice Nathan counts in fathoms. 1 fathom is about 1.8 meters. Then the harvest of crab pot boarding dropped quite a bit. There are 8 of them after sorting. And then the second cage has the Mary float. It's like a fucking door to a fucking door to a fucking house. They pulled up the Mary's crab pot to have a look. It's full of king crabs. Nathan looked at it and it turned hot. Let them come with kindness. And then they gave themselves this one. Nathan had no choice but to bag the crab. Before Nathan could say anything about the live propeller, there was an accident. Nathan sensed something was wrong in an instant. The crew found the crab pot line at the bottom of the boat. Nathan's trying to break him with a propeller, but it doesn't have any eggs. It's probably caused by the crab pot wire being wrapped too deeply. Then the crew came up and asked Nathan what to do. Nathan honk, 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 but he didn't have any hope. After all, it's impossible to get the wire out by human hands. And then they started working with the crew. Freddie was surprised to find the tangle loose, followed by a direct miracle. The accident was solved as easily as that. Nathan was ready to call the Coast Guard. Suddenly, I heard the crew pull the line out, but still not happy, because the Mary ruined Nathan's good mood. The crew then resumed the salvage. The second cage came on board and was sorted with 22. At this point, Freddie is also making fun of Casey's inauthenticity. After teasing continue fishing, Nathan said the crab pot from the Mary, right next to their crab pot. There wasn't much Nathan could do about it, so he decided to get out of the crab pot and run. Then the crab pot comes on board again, but only one crab. As time goes by, one by one, the crab pots were brought aboard. Nathan watched the crab pot and ran away. The view then returns to Norway. At this time, Old White drove the car to find a captain. The purpose is to get information. The captain's name was Latte. He's a native Norwegian. After half a point of driving, Old White is also near the destination. Get off and head for the boat. Isn't that the owner of the ship outside the boss? Then Old White showed him his crabbing route and says there aren't many king crabs. A large Norwegian crab boat known to the owner, mostly catching crabs on the Russian border. The location is roughly around the 26th parallel. The depth has to be about 190 meters. Then White took a picture of the location, 3,600 miles southeast of the Mary. They're fishing for crab pots now too, and they get pretty good results. There are 35 adult crabs after sorting. The subsequent second cage was also fruitful. They now have an average harvest of about 25. They say that what goes around comes around. It was Casey's mistake soon after. The crab pot rope got caught in the propeller, and the crew had a hard time figuring it out. Direct red heat to Casey's chi. Then they thought about Nathan. Nathan also received the radio. Nathan wasn't going to kill them. The standoff lasted for more than 10 minutes. In the end, it is the good intentions of the heart. In response to these two unchivalrous boys, I heard about their problems. He said he'd be there in half an hour. Nathan said the same thing, just on this Bering Sea. If the other captains are in trouble, I will certainly help others through difficulties. Nathan's conscience got better. It goes right back to the rescue. They decided to hold the crab pot line with a hook and pulled out through the thief's winch. Then Freddie spotted the spot and threw an anchor hook. Then the plan went well. Nathan took the boat and sped it up. I pulled the rope out. It took more than 30 seconds. I can't even explain it. Then three people a polite ending. The picture comes to the legend. They rushed to the port and began unloading. Anyway, it's pretty impressive to watch this school of fish. Then the crew began to unload the cargo. The time came the next morning. Anderson's fish. I bought a total of $670,000. Remove the shareholder's share. Anderson got $330,000. 5% for each crew member, about $16,000 each. And Mason has some good news for Anderson. He applied for an additional 62,000 pounds of quota from the port. Anderson was the first to call Sean. Share the joy of this harvest. And that's the end of this video. Do you want to know what happened next? The captain's earnings until last. Every time there's a storm on the crab boat, captains perform all sorts of strange rituals. For example, the Old White, the Old Den is more heavy mouth. He chose to hug the crab and kiss it, or a French kiss. But some captains are more extreme. Like Captain Carr, every time you go out to sea, you make a sacrifice. When there is no one at night, all unlucky people die by accident, and they get a good harvest. This method is useful in personal test. It's been 40 days since the crab season began. The Golden King crab purchase will continue for 2 more weeks at most. This will be the start of this year's fall snow crab season. Just as the Golden King crab fleet was about to die, there's bad news from the Bering Sea. A 400,000 square mile hurricane from the Aleutian Islands. From the west into the Bering Sea, the view goes to the Pat. After a week, Carl must be done with the wounded. But the wounded are definitely not coming. So he hired someone new. With a new man in place, the Pat leaves. The picture came to the Mary. Because of the storm, the waves here are like 5 layers of blood rage. Seeing the crew is a noxious guillotine. Josh is up there teaching his brother. It's mostly about being safe. What? After explaining things, my brother went back to work. Josh said the buyers stopped buying. They also had to keep their crews working overnight. The crew has been working for 12 hours now, but they still have to salvage another batch of crab pots to get 4 hours of rest. Then the crew began to salvage. Josh said the crab pots were about 60 feet. Not much depth though, but there's a lot of seaweed and there should be crabs. Then the crab pot boarded the boat, really no chicken hair. Well, I guess they still don't have a lot of experience picking places. After you put away the crab pot, the crew began to salvage the second cage. Turn with the take-up machine, but the second cage still has no feathers. Then a new crew member went to the bow to fetch the float. That gave Josh a bit of a shock. Get this crew down here now, and said the weather was not suitable for hanging out on the bow. But the crew can barely hear you. Watching the waves close at hand, Josh slows down to keep the crew safe. Fortunately, the boat made it safely past the waves. That crewman got his ass kicked by Josh too. I heard Josh yelling at the crew for not wanting to come calm down. Josh sensed something was wrong with the crew. Josh then informs the crew that there are 30 crab pots left. You get a 4-hour break when you're done. 3,400 miles northwest of the Stowe. By this time, Old White had reached the vicinity of Russia. It's just 4 miles from the border. The crew below learned Russian. Old White said he got word of the snow crab season. It puts a lot of pressure on him. That's why he decided to take a shot here. Hurry up and get the last 300,000 quota back to Bering Sea to catch snow crabs. Now they're at a depth of 340 meters. A little deeper than White expected, but according to the owner, it's just the right depth. So he told the crew to start preparing the cage. Then the first crab pot enters the water. Mr. By said the crew had added 40 meters to the fishing line temporarily. So it's easy to knot a fishing line that's not straightened out, like right now, but it won't be a problem with Gale in charge. Thrown into the sea with the float. This time the first crab pot is officially released. The crew then cast 30 more crab pots, 3,800 miles southeast of the pad. After 16 hours sailing near the destination, the crew was having lunch. Several crew members ate noodles. I thought the crew ate king crab every day. With lunchtime over, Carl began to give instructions to the new crew, or be safe or something. After explaining things, a few Carl back to the cab. Carl said it was a week late, causing them to lose hundreds of thousands. But I threw a crab pot in here before I went home, and it's been going on for a week. Carl estimates that there are no fewer than 50 crabs per cage. Then the crew began to salvage. Turn with the take-up machine. The crab pot fell twice before it was even on board. Seeing the harvest, Carl couldn't help but swear, because there are only a few in this crab cage. The next cage was empty, and the crab pot is torn apart by the ocean currents. The fourth cage followed by repeated horizontal jumps. Carl from above suddenly spotted a big wave on his right, before he could warn the waves to come. But the crew is still tough. But the crew suddenly noticed that one of the wires had spontaneously ignited. A fire is no joke. Fortunately, one of the crew members immediately stabbed the wire, stopped the fire from spreading. After the episode, Carl said a fire on the boat was deadly, because there's a lot of containment in the hull. Once you get that little fire going, the ship will be covered in smoke in half an hour. There will be no hope for the whole ship. As the crew hauled out the crab pots one by one, Carl decided to move on. It's a dangerous place with no crabs. Stay here and be a pure idiot. 3,900 miles northwest of the Troe. Bill said his summer bay was fixed and got a $350,000 repair bill. So Bill decided to finish the crab and go back. This time Bill will go to the Bering Sea, ready to buy some cod quotas. But right now we have to focus on catching crabs. Bill said the crab pot was about 200 meters this time. It feels like a lot of crabs. Then the crew began to salvage, but the crab pot failed him this time. There's nothing in there. The next cage was again empty. In the third cage came one, but the little female crabs have to be thrown away. The fourth cage that followed also had two. Bill can't see this place going anywhere. I came up with my choice. It's an underwater cliff. The depth is about 300. The terrain is similar to that of the Bering Sea. It's a sandy spot under a cliff. After the crew scoops up the crab pot, Bill took the boat to the place. We'll be at the designated location in half an hour. The crew began to cast cages. Follow the crab pot into the sea one by one. 3,500 miles southeast to the Mary. Needless to say, they got a lot. It's also the last of its kind in these waters. Josh then called his brother up to show him the chart. He pointed his brother to the sea where he was now and said it was an underwater cliff. Their crab pots were thrown under the cliff. Then two people talk, and talk inevitably do not think of father. Think back to Phil. All kinds of timely command. Josh lamented how he couldn't catch up with his father over the years. Phil's cage is a throwaway, and they find the crab exactly every time. With Josh finding the perfect ocean, he decided to follow his father's example. While the crew readies the crab pots, the waves are getting bigger and bigger. Casey decided not to wait until the storm stopped, so the crew began to cast cages. When the cage is thrown, the waves are constantly harassing. I guess if I get photographed, I'll see God, with another crab pot into the sea. The crew also began to accelerate the pace of the cage. But just as the cage project was coming to an end, Shane accidentally got caught in the fishing line. The crew responded quickly and rushed forward. Shane was rescued in less than 2 seconds. Kathy from above quickly gave her brother another word. He even swore out when he was angry. After all, it's something they've told him a million times. And then Shane said, because the hours are too long. I was a little out of it. One got tangled up in a fishing line without noticing. I'm really glad to be alive. After the horn, the crew continued to cast the cage, with the last 4 crab pots into the sea. That's it for today's cage throw. The crew also gets a precious 12-hour break. Josh says he has high hopes for the crab pots. 3,400 miles northwest of the Stowe. The crew are now fishing for crab pots. White said he's been talking to Mandy a lot lately. Sounds like Clark's taking good care of her. At the same time, I must hurry to finish my trip to Norway, because Mandy's due in less than a month. It's up to this batch of crab pots to make it back. Then the crab pot board harvest is quite wow. I was so excited for Old White. After sorting, the number was as high as 54. According to the harvest, less than 3 days, Old White can go back. Then the second cage hit them in the head. It's a harvest the Old White can live with. But the next cage had none. There's still nothing in the fourth cage at the back. Old White's mood fell to the bottom of the mountain. Then Old White gave Bill a call. He informed Bill of his situation. Bill told White not to lose heart and suggested a small gully to try. Old White also felt that Bill's idea would work. I thanked Bill and started looking for a seat. It didn't take long for him to find one. This is a ravine 3 miles wide. The depth is also about 330 meters. The crew was then told to move. The Pat, 240 miles southwest of Dutch Harbor. After a day's journey, they arrived near their destination. But the weather here is just as bad. It was not long before the crew arrived on deck. They began to prepare for the crab pot throwing mission. When you're ready, start placing the crab pots, one crab pot after another into the sea. Carl also introduced the sea. He says this sea is called Koning Country. The sea floor is covered with rocks, up to a kilometer at its deepest point, and the current is very strong. It's a classic Golden King crab spot. His plan was to follow a cliff, one crab pot every 3 meters from the top down. When crabs come, they're attracted to the bait. At this time, the crab pot also dropped half a string. The crew was nearly hit as they tried to move the crab pot. Carl's lung tubes are about to explode because he warned the crew a million times. Be sure to stay away when the crab pot falls. After the incident, the crew continued to cast cages. Carl said a million accidents, all caused by carelessness. So when the crew made a mistake, he usually reprimands him very harshly. It helps the crew members who make mistakes remember. Northwest 402 Mile Mary. Josh says they have 300 crabs on board. If we had 100 more unsecured cages, they'll probably be able to go back and submit their quotas. Dude's dreaming in the middle of the day, but Shane has faith in his brother's cage. Before we get to the cage, the crew began to clean the deck, said Shane, who was idle. He thought he had learned his lesson today, so make sure there are no mistakes today. They were happy to hear their brother say that. As the clock ticks down to half an hour later, they're also near the float. While the crew was fishing for crab pots, Josh and Cassie made a bet. I bet Shane wouldn't make another mistake. Casey's bet was wrong, and Josh trusted his brother. The bet is $100. The two of them just said the bet crab pot came up, and this is a pretty good pot of crabs. There were 31 of them after sorting. The crew then resumed the salvage. The second cage was also very good. There are 28 crabs after sorting. The third pot is a small harvest. There are 21 adult crabs after sorting. The crab pot harvest subsequently stabilized at around 23 animals. Shane didn't make a mistake either. Get excited for Casey and get on the radio. Tell Shane to stop hiding. As time goes by, the last crab of the day is on deck. This bet, Josh wins, and he encouraged Shane when he got the money. You are my brother. Shane said he was happy to be with his brother. Said it was the most memorable experience I've ever had. Josh said Dad would be proud of you. 3,400 miles northwest of Stowe. White's trip to Norway depends on this cage. But first we look at Bill. They are fishing for the last of the crab pots. As long as the crabs live up to expectations, Bill can go back to Dutch Harbor and start catching cod. With the crab pot on board, the pot is a successful harvest. There are 4 qualified large crabs after sorting. This harvest is enough for Xiao Long. As the take-up machine turns the second cage aboard, there are 7 big crabs in this cage after sorting. And then the third cage was even worse. After sorting, there were 6 huge ones. Bill said he could get $3,000 for all 3 cages. The view then moves to the Stowe as the salvage begins. Old White has to pray to the crab god now. As the take-up machine begins to exert force, the Old White was so nervous. Then the crab pot on the ship to receive very well. There are 35 adult crabs after sorting. The second cage that followed was also quite successful. An endless harvest followed. To the Old White excited boat is not to sail. It's going to be Gaga kissing crabs. Soon the last cage was salvaged. The crew lit the fire hook, then throw it hard. Then it comes to Dutch Harbor. Casey and Josh came back to unload the crabs. They caught a total of 16 tons of crabs. $500,000 from the crab sale. After unloading the crabs, they went out to sea again. This time the target is snow crabs. In the evening, Old White also arrived at the port. A total of 9 tons of crabs caught by Lao by this time. I got $400,000, $20,000 each to the crew. Bill made a total of $200,000, 20 grand each for 2 crew members. Give Old White another 50 grand. The remaining $110,000 belongs to Bill's harvest. The view goes to the Pat. They started fishing for crab pots. The first cage that is designated to be a large drop of harvest. There are 36 adult crabs after sorting. Carl was quite pleased with the harvest. Then the second harvest was even more spectacular. After sorting, there was a harvest of 49 animals, not to mention the third cage. After sorting, 53 animals were harvested. I wasn't happy for 2 seconds. A crew member suddenly fell to the ground. The crew immediately ran to check it out, and then they shouted for a few minutes and didn't respond. At the same time, Carl was confused. Don't you know what the crew is up to? The injured crew member's face was covered with blood, but Carl up there is still confused. That's the end of this video. Do you want to know what happened next? See the chart below for captain's earnings.